So we've talked about monopoly and what profit maximization looks like, and the issues with efficiency and equity that arise when markets are monopolized and output is kept lower than in competitive markets and prices higher. But even though we prefer competitive markets, even though we have laws against monopoly, even though we have laws against anti-competitive behavior, even though we have all these things in place to encourage markets to be more competitive, the government still turns around sometimes and grants monopolies. One clear one is in the case of patents, where a patent is a legal right to be the only person to produce them. You come up with an invention, you get a patent for it, and then nobody else can make it. It may not give you an exact monopoly. It depends on if the patent is for something where there are still some substitutes, exactly how the market is defined. But a lot of times, particularly with pharmaceuticals, if you get a drug that is really good, like Lipitor was at lowering cholesterol, that was huge because it was so much more effective than any other drug, and it was on patent. And so the people that made Lipitor, name is escaping me now, but they could make a huge amount of money because they had a patent that said no one else is allowed to make this. So they could charge a really large amount of money and reap all of those monopoly profits at the expense of all the consumers that had to pay so much more. So you're thinking, why does the government do this? Well, one thing they do is patents don't last forever, right? They're in the range of 15 to 20 years. Pharmaceutical patents are a little bit different now than they used to be. But the idea is, if we want people to spend all of that time and money and effort developing a drug, developing a really successful drug can take years and years and years, decades, because you try all these things and they don't work. So you're paying all these scientists, paying all this lab space. You come up with something that might work, then you have to run clinical trials and pay all that. And then that doesn't pan out, and then you start all over, or you change something and you start from there. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money invested. And so if it turned out as soon as you came up with this great drug that could do all these things, or this great other invention, when you come up with some great invention, you spend all this time and effort on research and development and innovation, and then as soon as you come up with it, anyone can make it, right? Because a lot of drugs, when you produce them, the actual cost of making the pills is not very big. Most of the cost is in that upfront research and development. And if as soon as you created this new drug, anyone could make it for just the cost of making the pills, then the price is going to be driven down to just the cost of the pills, and you will have spent tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on research and development to create this drug, and you'll never get it back. So I'm not defending pharmaceutical pricing at all. There are a lot of really questionable things from a consumer perspective going on with pharmaceutical pricing, but the idea that all drugs should be sold at the cost to make the pills, that's great, and we can do that as long as we're going to fund research and development some other way. If the government wants to fund research and development to all the things that we want to create new drugs for, then yes, absolutely, we could just price it at the cost to make pills. But if we want private companies to invest tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in developing new drugs and not let them recoup any of that expense, that's not going to happen. So as long as we're happy with the drugs we have now, if we think we're living long enough, I mean, our life expectancies are pretty long, then we could stop this. But so the idea behind patents is that we're going to give you monopoly power for a little while, so you can reap monopoly profits in order to encourage innovation and investment in R&D, shorthand for research and development. Just the idea is, if people don't have an incentive, if they're not going to actually be able to gain any profit at all from coming up with new ideas and new products, then they're going to stop coming up with new ideas and new products. So we either have to give them at least some incentive, and again, patents do expire. You can't have a patent forever. And a lot of patents, like in technology and things like that, you might have a patent for 17 years, but well before the 17 years is up, your patent is irrelevant because technology has moved on from that. So when did the first iPhone come out? In 2005. So it's been about 17 years. But yeah, so things move on, things change. But patents, even if you have a patent that really is profitable, it doesn't last forever. So we say you can earn your profit for a little while and then not anymore. So then at some point Lipitor went off patent, and now all these generics can be produced using the same formula, and so you can get this drug significantly cheaper through generics than was possible before the patent expired. The other situation in which we see the government granting monopoly power is in situations what we call natural monopoly. And a natural monopoly is a situation, we call it that because it just makes sense for there to be one firm producing. And it happens because there are economies of scale over the whole range of output. Remember, economies of scale are when average cost keeps falling and falling and falling and falling. So as you produce more, it's cheaper on average to produce. And so it would look like this. So there's Q, and your average cost, your long run average cost just keeps falling and falling and falling. And let's say that's the total amount that would be demanded in the market. It's just a lot cheaper for one firm to do that than if you had, let's say, 4 firms, each producing 1/4 of Q2, QT, Q total. They were producing, that's the average cost with 1 firm, that's the average cost with 4 firms. It just makes sense in some cases to just have 1 firm producing. And this is often the case in things where there are really high infrastructure costs, like water. If you want water to come out of your tap, you only have one choice. In my case, it's the city of Stockton, so the city is keeping the monopoly to itself. But where I used to live in Stockton, it was California Water Service, right? But California Water Service was granted the right to be the only firm. If you lived in that area and you wanted to turn on your taps and have water come out, which a lot of us do, that was your only choice. And the government says you get to be the only firm, because it doesn't make sense for a bunch of firms to build all these pipe infrastructures and to build water treatment facilities and to do all of that, because there's that huge cost. Then if you have that huge infrastructure cost, and then you can spread it over more and more and more and more and more and more people. So if you spend $100 million, but you can serve 1 million customers, then it's $100 per customer for that infrastructure. But if 4 firms spend $100 million and they only each have a 250,000 customers, then it's $400. So if you have these big costs and you can spread them out over more and more people, and the average cost just keeps falling and falling and falling because of it, it just makes sense for one firm. So the water company, PG&E, we experimented with more competition in electricity, and that didn't work as well. Or it used to be the case with the phone company back when you actually had to lay phone lines. It used to be the case that phones were attached to the wall by a cord, which was then attached, and you couldn't call anywhere where there wasn't a cord attached. So there was a lot of infrastructure laying those phone lines everywhere. Now, of course, we don't need that. Again, technologies make some monopolies moot. But in cases like that, it just kind of makes sense for one firm to do it. It's a lot cheaper on average if one firm just does the whole infrastructure, or with things like the U.S. Postal Service has the whole sort of distribution network and things like that. There just are some cases where it might make sense for there to be one firm. And so the government either just takes that role on itself and says, we'll just be the one firm producing it, but it'll still be a monopoly, or they grant that monopoly to somebody else, like California Water Service, but then typically there's regulated price. So we say you're a monopolist, but if this is, what the demand looks like, and this is what the marginal revenue looks like, and this is what marginal cost looks like, something like that. We're not going to say you're not allowed to just keep your output really low and keep your price really high. We're going to give you the monopoly, but we're going to restrict you to charging a much more close to competitive price. We'll let you earn a normal rate of return, but we're not going to, we'll let you be a monopoly, we'll let you be the only firm, but we're not going to let you act like a monopoly, is the idea behind it. So there are situations in which, even though in general we much prefer competitive markets to monopoly markets because of efficiency and equity concerns, there are situations in which it might make sense for there to be a monopoly, at least in some cases, at least for a limited amount of time.